You think you know power? You think a badge and a gun make you a god? Wait until you see the look on a corrupt officer's face when the thug he threw in a cell walks out in a black robe and picks up the gavel. This isn't just a story about justice. It's a masterclass in patience. We are talking about Judge Nathaniel Alexander, a man who didn't just get mad, he got even. Watch closely, because the karma you're about to witness is brutal, swift, and completely legally binding. You do not want to miss the twist in Part 4. The rain on Interstate 95 wasn't just falling, it was hammering against the windshield of the 1969 Mercedes-Benz 280 SL like handfuls of gravel. Inside the vintage convertible, the heater hummed a low, comforting struggle against the October chill. Nathaniel Alexander adjusted his grip on the ivory steering wheel. At 52, Nathaniel had the kind of face that usually stopped arguments before they started. Sharp cheekbones, eyes that had read too many lie detector results to be easily fooled, and a beard trimmed with the precision of a surgical scalpel. He was tired. It had been a 3-week conference in D.C. on constitutional law reform, and he just wanted to get back to his brownstone in Philadelphia. He wasn't wearing his usual bespoke suits. He was in a comfortable, nondescript grey hoodie and sweatpants, worn in from years of Sunday lounging. To the passing world, he wasn't the Honorable Justice Alexander of the Third Circuit. He was just a black man in an expensive car, driving late at night. He saw the lights before he heard the siren. Blue and red slashed through the darkness in his rearview mirror. Nathaniel sighed, the sound heavy in the small cabin. He checked his speedometer. He was doing 63 in a 65. He signaled right, slowing down gradually, pulling over onto the muddy shoulder, just past the terrifyingly dark stretch of woods near the Delaware border. He killed the engine. He rolled down the window. He placed both hands on the top of the steering wheel, fingers spread wide. He knew the drill. He had written opinions on the drill. In the side mirror, 2 figures approached. Flashlights blinded him instantly. License and registration. Now. The voice was jagged, impatient. Good evening, officer, Nathaniel said, his voice a calm baritone. My identification is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for it now. I didn't ask for a commentary. I asked for the ID. Move slow. The flashlight beam hit Nathaniel's face, staying there a second too long, then dropped to the passenger seat, then the back. Nice car, the second officer said. He was younger, with a buzz cut that looked aggressive even in the rain. His name tag, barely visible under the slicker, read Hollis. The older one, the one with the jagged voice and the hand resting too close to his holster, was SGT. Bronson. Thank you, Nathaniel said, handing over his license. It was his standard driver's license, not his judicial credentials. He kept those in a leather folio in the trunk. Tonight, he wanted to see how this played out without the shield of his office. He had heard rumors about the aggressive highway interdiction teams in this county, Cecil County. Bronson snatched the license. Nathaniel Alexander, Philadelphia. Long way from home, Nate. It's about an hour drive, Nathaniel corrected gently. And I prefer Mr. Alexander. Bronson chuckled, a wet, ugly sound. You got any weapons in the car, Mr. Alexander? Drugs? Large amounts of cash? No weapons, no drugs, just my luggage in the trunk. Step out of the vehicle. Nathaniel paused. Officer, may I ask why I was pulled over? I wasn't speeding. You swerved, Hollis piped up, tapping his flashlight on the doorframe. Failure to maintain lane. Looked like you were weaving. Might be intoxicated. I haven't had a drop of alcohol, Nathaniel said, unbuckling his seatbelt. And I certainly didn't swerve. Out, now! Bronson yanked the door open. Nathaniel stepped out into the rain. The cold water soaked his hoodie instantly. He stood a full head taller than Bronson, which seemed to irritate the sergeant immediately. "Turn around. Hands on the hood." Nathaniel complied. The cold metal of the Mercedes bit into his palms. He felt Bronson's hands patting him down, rough, intrusive. Bronson kicked Nathaniel's ankles apart, wider than necessary, nearly making him slip in the mud. "We're going to search the car," Hollis announced, already leaning into the driver's side. "I do not consent to a search," Nathaniel said clearly. "You have no probable cause." Bronson leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale coffee and wintergreen tobacco. "I smell marijuana. That's probable cause. Hollis, tear it apart." "There is no marijuana in this car," Nathaniel said, his heart rate climbing despite his training. "Officer, you are making a mistake." "The only mistake was you thinking you could run drugs through my county in a midlife crisis mobile," Bronson spat. They tossed the car. They didn't just search it, they desecrated it. Nathaniel watched helplessly as Hollis dumped his suitcase onto the wet asphalt. His freshly pressed shirts, his legal journals, a framed photo of his late wife, all thrown into the mud. Hollis held up a prescription bottle. "Oxycodone. Bingo." "That is for my knee surgery," Nathaniel said, his voice hardening. "The label is in my name. It is legal." "We'll see about that," Bronson said. He grabbed Nathaniel's wrist and twisted it behind his back, snapping the handcuffs on tight. Too tight. "You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance and suspicion of DUI." "This is ridiculous," Nathaniel said, wincing as the metal cut into his wrist. "Check the date on the bottle. Check the doctor." "Shut up!" Bronson shoved him toward the cruiser. "You can tell it to the judge." Nathaniel stumbled, catching his balance just before his face hit the cruiser's door. He took a deep breath, looking Bronson dead in the eye. The rain ran down Nathaniel's face like tears, but his eyes were burning dry. "Oh, I intend to," Nathaniel whispered. "I really, really intend to." The holding cell at the Cecil County precinct smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies. It was a concrete box painted a depression-inducing shade of beige. Nathaniel sat on the metal bench, his wet clothes clinging to his skin, shivering slightly. They had taken his phone. They had taken his shoelaces. They had taken his belt. He looked less like a federal circuit judge and more like the criminal they desperately wanted him to be. He had been processed by a desk sergeant who didn't even look up from his sandwich. Fingerprinted. Mugshot. The humiliation was a systematic process designed to strip away identity layer by layer until only a number remained. There were 2 other men in the cell. One was a young white kid coming down from something hard, twitching in the corner. The other was an older black man, maybe 60, nursing a swollen eye. "First time?" the older man asked, his voice raspy. Nathaniel nodded slowly. "In this county?" "Yes." "They get you for weaving?" the man asked with a knowing smirk. "Failure to maintain lane," Nathaniel recited, "and possession of my own knee medication." The man laughed, wincing as he touched his eye. "Bronson?" Nathaniel looked up sharply. "You know him?" "Everyone knows Sergeant Bronson. He's the king of the highway. If you're driving anything nice and you don't look like him, you're paying the tax. He took $200 out of my wallet and said it was evidence. Never logged it." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Does he now?" "Don't fight it, brother," the man warned. "Just plead out. Public defender will tell you to take probation. It's a racket. If you fight, they stack charges. Resisting arrest, assault on an officer. They'll ruin you." Nathaniel leaned back against the cold cinder block. "I don't think I'll be taking the public defender." An hour passed, then 2. Nathaniel closed his eyes, replaying the encounter. Every procedural error, every civil rights violation, the lack of Miranda warnings, the fabrication of probable cause, the smell of marijuana. It wasn't just sloppy, it was predatory. Finally, a guard banged on the bars. "Alexander, you got a phone call. Make it quick." Nathaniel was led to a wall phone in the hallway. He dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice. "Holloway residence," a crisp, tired voice answered. "Arthur," Nathaniel said. There was a pause. "Nate, is that you? It's 3 a.m. Why are you calling from a collect number?" Arthur Holloway was arguably the most expensive criminal defense attorney in Philadelphia, and Nathaniel's college roommate from Harvard Law. "I'm in Cecil County lockup, Artie. Sergeant Bronson and Officer Hollis. False DUI. Possession of valid prescription meds." "Jesus Christ," Arthur breathed. "I'm on my way. I'll have the bail bondsman there in 20 minutes. Do you want me to call the DA? I can have this dropped before sunrise." "No," Nathaniel said, his voice cold and sharp. "No. Do not call the DA. Do not tell them who I am. I want to go through the system, Arthur. I want the arraignment." "Nate, you're crazy. You want to sit in there." "I want them to stand in front of a judge and lie, Arthur. I want it on the record. I want to see the paperwork they file. If you pull strings now, they get a slap on the wrist. I want the full show." "You're planning something," Arthur said, the sleep leaving his voice. "I know that tone. That's your, I'm about to overrule the Supreme Court tone. Just get me bail, Artie, and bring my suit, the blue pinstripe, and my robe." "Your robe?" "Nate, you can't wear a robe to your own arraignment." "Not for my arraignment," Nathaniel whispered, eyeing the guard who was scrolling on his phone nearby. "Bring the robe to the car. I have a feeling the docket is going to be interesting tomorrow." "Nate, what is going on?" "I check the judicial rotation schedule every month, Arthur. It's a habit. Do you know who is sitting in for the emergency circuit hearings in Cecil County tomorrow, because Judge Reynolds is out with the flu?" Arthur was silent for a moment. Then he gasped. "You have visiting privileges in that district. You signed the cross-jurisdictional order last week. Get me out of here, Arthur. We have court in the morning." The sun rose pale and weak over the Cecil County Courthouse. It was a red brick building that looked historic on the outside, but smelled of floor wax and despair on the inside. Sergeant Bronson and Officer Hollis stood by the vending machines in the hallway, sipping bad coffee. They looked fresh, their uniforms pressed, their confidence sky high. "How many we got today?" Hollis asked, stifling a yawn. 3 DUIs, that domestic from the trailer park, and the Alexander guy." Bronson checked his clipboard. "The rich guy," Hollis laughed. "Rich guy probably cried all night. Bet he pleads out instantly. Did you log the cash from his wallet?" Bronson shot him a look. "What cash? There wasn't any cash." Hollis smirked. "Right, no cash." They walked into courtroom B. It was packed. It was arraignment day, the cattle call of the justice system. The air was thick with tension. Families whispered in the benches. Defendants in orange jumpsuits sat in the jury box, chained together. Nathaniel Alexander sat in the back row of the gallery. He was out on bail. He was clean-shaven, wearing the navy blue bespoke suit Arthur had brought him. He looked like a titan of industry. Arthur sat next to him, looking nervous. "This is risky, Nate," Arthur whispered. "It's necessary," Nathaniel replied, his eyes fixed on Bronson, who was flirting with the court reporter near the bench. The bailiff, a heavy-set woman named Martha who had seen it all, stood up. "All rise." The room shuffled to its feet. Usually, Judge Reynolds, a man known for being asleep half the time, would waddle out. But today, the door to the judge's chambers opened, and a different figure emerged. He wasn't wearing the robe yet. He was a visiting clerk, a young woman with glasses. "Judge Reynolds is indisposed," she announced to the confused room. Presiding over the emergency docket today, by special assignment from the Third Circuit, is the Honourable Justice. She paused, squinting at the paper. The door opened wider. Nathaniel didn't move from the gallery. He wasn't the judge yet. A visiting judge from the neighbouring county, Judge Whittaker, stepped up. He looked harried. "All right, let's get through this. I have a golf game at 2. First case." Nathaniel leaned over to Arthur. "Wait for it." The morning dragged on. Bronson and Hollis breezed through 3 cases. They were efficient liars. They recited the same script: glassy eyes, smell of alcohol, belligerent behavior. Judge Whittaker, bored and rushed, rubber-stamped everything. Then came the call. State versus Nathaniel Alexander. Bronson straightened up. He walked to the prosecutor's table. The assistant district attorney, a young kid named Miller, looked at the file. "Your Honor, the defendant is charged with DUI and possession of a Schedule II narcotic." Arthur stood up. "Ready for the defense, Your Honor." Nathaniel stood up beside him. Bronson looked back, smirking at Nathaniel. He mouthed the words, "You're screwed." Judge Whittaker looked at the file, then at Nathaniel. He frowned. He looked at the file again. His face went pale. He looked at the name. Nathaniel Alexander. Whittaker looked up, his eyes widening. He recognized the man standing in the defense spot. Everyone in the legal circuit knew Nathaniel Alexander. He was the front-runner for the state Supreme Court. "Mr. Alexander?" Whittaker stammered. "Good morning, Judge Whittaker," Nathaniel said smoothly. "I believe we have met at the judicial conference in Atlantic City last year." The courtroom went silent. Bronson's smirk faltered. He looked from the judge to the criminal. I wasn't aware you were the defendant," Whittaker said, sweating. "This is highly irregular." "It is," Nathaniel agreed, "and I would like to make a motion immediately." "Of course," Whittaker said. "I move for a dismissal of all charges based on lack of probable cause, illegal search and seizure, and fabrication of evidence. Furthermore, I would like to submit into evidence the dash-cam footage from my own vehicle, which uploads to the cloud in real time. Footage which I believe Sergeant Bronson and Officer Hollis are unaware exists." Bronson froze. His hand went instinctively to his belt. "Objection!" the young DA squeaked. "We haven't seen this evidence." "Oh, you will," Nathaniel said, turning to look at Bronson. The warmth was gone from his eyes. "But first, Judge Whittaker, I believe you have a conflict of interest. You and Sergeant Bronson play poker on Thursday nights, do you not?" Whittaker choked. I recuse myself." "I thought you might," Nathaniel said. "And since there is no other judge available—" Nathaniel turned to Arthur, who handed him the leather bag. According to State Statute 14b, in the event of an emergency recusal where a visiting federal justice is present in the jurisdiction, Nathaniel pulled out his black robe. It flowed like water as he shook it out. He put one arm in, then the other. He zipped it up. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear Bronson's heart breaking. Nathaniel walked out of the defense area. He walked past the stunned DA. He walked past the trembling Bronson, pausing for just a fraction of a second to whisper, "Failure to maintain lane?" He walked up the steps to the bench. Judge Whittaker hurriedly vacated the chair, practically running to the side. Nathaniel Alexander sat down. He adjusted the microphone. He picked up the gavel. He looked down at Sergeant Bronson, whose face had gone the color of old ash. "Bailiff," Judge Alexander said, his voice booming like thunder in a valley. "Lock the doors. Nobody leaves." The sound of the lock clicking shut on the heavy oak doors echoed like a gunshot. Sergeant Bronson stood frozen near the prosecutor's table. His arrogance, usually worn like armor, was beginning to crack, revealing the panic of a bully who has suddenly lost his playground. Officer Hollis looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, hands trembling near his belt. Judge Nathaniel Alexander didn't shout. He didn't scream. He simply opened a folder on the bench, a folder Arthur Halloway had slid up to him moments before. He took a pair of reading glasses from his pocket, unfolded them slowly, and placed them on his nose. "Sergeant Bronson," Nathaniel said. His voice was conversational, terrifyingly polite. "Please take the stand." Your Honor, I object," the young ADA, Miller, stammered. "You are the defendant in the current case. You cannot preside over—" "Mr. Miller," Nathaniel cut him off, looking over the rim of his glasses. "I have not called the case State vs. Alexander. That case is currently in abeyance, pending the arrival of a neutral adjudicator, which my clerk is arranging as we speak. However, under Article 4 of the Judicial Conduct Oversight Act, I am the presiding senior circuit judge in this room, and I have grave concerns regarding the integrity of the evidence presented in the previous 3 cases on this morning's docket. Cases in which Sergeant Bronson was the swearing officer. Cases which this court has the power to reopen sua sponte, on its own motion. Now, Sergeant, the stand, or shall I hold you in contempt?" Bronson looked at Miller. Miller looked at his shoes. Bronson walked to the witness stand. His boots, usually heavy and authoritative on the floorboards, sounded clumsy. He sat down. "You are under oath, Sergeant," Nathaniel reminded him. "Remind me. The case of State versus Henderson. The young man you processed at 8:15 a.m. this morning. You stated he was weaving and smelled of alcohol?" "Yes, Your Honor." Bronson's voice was tight. "And you administered a field sobriety test?" "I did." "And he failed?" "He stumbled. He couldn't walk the line." Nathaniel nodded slowly. He picked up a document. "I have here the calibration logs for the dash cam on your cruiser, Unit Force Alpha. It records 24/7, does it not?" It malfunctions sometimes, Your Honor. The battery, it dies." "Does it?" Nathaniel leaned forward. "Because according to the cloud server logs accessed by my office this morning, Unit 4 Alpha was uploading data perfectly all night, including during the stop of Mr. Henderson." Nathaniel turned to the bailiff. "Connect the display, please." A large screen to the left of the jury box flickered to life. The video was grainy, shot from the dashboard of a cruiser. It showed a young man standing on the side of the road in the rain. He wasn't stumbling. He was shivering. "Walk the line." Bronson's voice came from the video speakers. The young man walked, heel to toe, perfect balance. He turned. He walked back. "He looks quite sober to me, Sergeant," Nathaniel observed. On screen, the video Bronson grew impatient. He walked over to the young man and shoved him. The boy fell into the mud. "Resisting!" the video Bronson shouted. "Stop fighting me!" The courtroom gasped. A woman in the gallery, Henderson's mother, started crying. Nathaniel paused the video. He looked at the real Bronson, who was now gripping the railing of the witness box so hard his knuckles were white. "That wasn't a stumble, Sergeant," Nathaniel said, his voice dropping an octave. "That was a battery. You assaulted a citizen to manufacture a cause for arrest." It looked different from my angle," Bronson choked out. "Let's talk about angles," Nathaniel said, flipping a page. "Let's talk about the angle of your flashlight in my car last night. You claimed you found oxycodone on the floorboard." "I object!" Miller shouted, finding a spine. "You are now discussing your own case." "I am discussing the credibility of this witness, Mr. Miller," Nathaniel roared, slamming the gavel down with such force that dust motes danced in the air. "If a police officer lies about a 20-year-old kid, does he lie about a federal judge? Does he lie about the single mother in the domestic dispute? If the fruit of the poisonous tree is rot, Mr. Miller, then we must chop down the whole damn tree. Nathaniel turned back to Bronson. Officer Hollis is your partner. He follows your lead. But you are the senior officer. You control the narrative. Tell me, Sergeant, when you pulled me over, did you run my plate? Yes. And what came back? Registration. Mercedes, Nathaniel Alexander. Did it flag as a government vehicle? Bronson hesitated. He licked his lips. Maybe. I didn't notice. You didn't notice the federal judiciary tag on the readout? A tag that requires you to notify a supervisor before initiating a search? Aye. It was raining. The screen was wet. Lies, Nathaniel said softly. You saw it? You saw a black man in a fancy car with a government tag, and you thought, here is a man with something to lose. Here is a man who will pay cash to make this go away. That is your M.O., isn't it, Sergeant? You tax the highway. I have never taken a bribe in my life, Bronson shouted, his face turning red. Is that so? Nathaniel smiled. It was a shark's smile. Then you won't mind if we examine the contents of your pockets right now. Bronson stood up. You can't do that. I have rights. You are in my courtroom, Nathaniel said, and I have probable cause. Just like you smelled marijuana in my car, I smell the distinct odor of corruption. Bailiff, search the witness. The bailiff, Martha, hesitated. She had worked with Bronson for 10 years, but she looked at the video still frozen on the screen, Bronson shoving the kid. She looked at the judge. She walked up to the stand. I'm sorry, Sarg, she muttered. Turn out your pockets. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating as Bronson slowly reached into his uniform pants. He pulled out a set of keys, a pack of gum, a pocket knife. The other pocket, Nathaniel commanded. Bronson glared at him. He reached into his left pocket. He pulled out a leather clip holding a wad of cash. Place it on the railing, Nathaniel said. Bronson dropped the money. It was a thick roll, mostly 20s and 50s. Count it, Martha, Nathaniel said. Martha fumbled with the bills. 400, 600, 800, $850, Your Honor. Nathaniel leaned back in the high leather chair. $850. A lot of walking around money for a Tuesday morning, Sergeant. I won it, Bronson spat. Poker. Poker, Nathaniel repeated. With Judge Whittaker, the judge who just fled my courtroom. Nathaniel turned to Arthur Halloway at the defense table. Mr. Halloway, do you have the affidavit from my bank? Arthur stood up, holding a piece of paper. I do, Your Honor. This is a withdrawal slip from the Philadelphia Chase Bank, dated yesterday afternoon. Nathaniel Alexander withdrew $1,000 in cash for his trip. And Mr. Halloway, Nathaniel continued, because I am a man of peculiar habits, and because I have prosecuted money laundering cases for a decade, do I not have a specific request when I withdraw large sums? You do, Arthur said, his voice ringing clear. You ask for sequential serial numbers. The color drained from Bronson's face so completely he looked like a wax figure. Read the first serial number on the bank manifest, Mr. Halloway, Nathaniel ordered. LG4459912B, Arthur read. Nathaniel pointed the gavel at Martha. Martha, pick up the top bill. Read the serial number. Martha's hands shook. She lifted the crisp $50 bill to the light. She squinted. G 4. She stopped. She looked at Bronson. There was fear in her eyes, but also disgust. 59912B. The courtroom erupted. It wasn't a cheer. It was a collective gasp of shock, followed by the low rumble of angry muttering. The public defender in the front row dropped his pen. The ADA, Miller, actually took a step away from the prosecutor's table, distancing himself physically from the police. "That's my money," Nathaniel said, his voice cutting through the noise. "That is the money you stole from my wallet, while Officer Hollis was destroying my luggage. You didn't log it into evidence. You put it in your pocket." Bronson looked around the room. He saw no allies. He saw only witnesses. "Officer Hollis," Nathaniel barked, shifting his gaze to the younger cop still standing by the door. Hollis jumped. "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you know?" "No!" Hollis screamed, cracking instantly. "I swear, he told me to check the trunk. I didn't know he took the cash. I just did what he said. He said if I didn't write the report, he'd have me fired." "You coward!" Bronson hissed at his partner. "Silence!" Nathaniel slammed the gavel again. "Sergeant Bronson, you are currently in possession of stolen property. You have committed perjury in my presence. You have violated the civil rights of at least 4 people in this room today alone." Nathaniel stood up. The robe made him look 10 feet tall. "Mr. Miller," Nathaniel addressed the ADA, "I believe the state has a new motion." Miller, realizing his career was on the line if he stayed on the wrong side of this, straightened his tie. He looked at Bronson with disdain. "Yes, Your Honor. The state moves to dismiss all charges against Nathaniel Alexander, Henderson, and the other defendants arrested by Officer Bronson in the last 24 hours. Furthermore," Miller took a deep breath, "the state requests a bench warrant for the immediate arrest of Sergeant Thomas Bronson for grand larceny, perjury, and official misconduct." "Motion granted," Nathaniel said. "Martha, take the sergeant into custody. Use his own cuffs. They're on his belt." Bronson lunged. It happened fast. The desperation of a trapped animal took over. Bronson didn't go for his gun. He knew he'd be shot by the other bailiffs, but he lunged toward the side exit, shoving Martha to the ground. "Stop him!" Arthur shouted. Bronson hit the door, but it was locked. Nathaniel had ordered the doors locked at the start. Bronson spun around, back against the wood, hand hovering near his taser. "Don't do it, Tom!" A voice came from the back. It was the sheriff. Sheriff Dalton had entered through the judge's chambers during the chaos. He stood by the bench, flanked by 2 deputies. He looked at Nathaniel, gave a respectful nod, and then looked at Bronson. "It's over, Tom," the sheriff said. "You embarrassed my department. You targeted a federal judge. You're done." Bronson's hand shook. He looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel stared down from the bench, his face unreadable. "You wanted to be the law, Sergeant. Now you're going to experience it. All of it." Bronson slumped. His hand dropped. The deputies moved in, spinning him around and slamming him against the door, the sound of cuffs clicking. Click, click, click was the sweetest sound Nathaniel had heard in years. "Get him out of my sight," Nathaniel ordered, "and read him his rights, clearly. I want no procedural errors on this one." As they dragged Bronson out, he locked eyes with Nathaniel one last time. The hate was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. Nathaniel sat back down. He felt the adrenaline crash, the exhaustion from the night in the cell hitting him. But he wasn't done. He looked at Officer Hollis, who was weeping silently. "I haven't forgotten about you, Officer Hollis," Nathaniel said. "You falsified a police report. You watched him shove a kid in the mud and said nothing. The blue wall of silence just crumbled. You have 2 choices. You can go to a cell right now, or you can sit in that witness chair and tell the district attorney everything Bronson has done for the last 5 years. Every stolen dollar. Every planted bag of drugs." Hollis looked at the empty door where Bronson had been dragged out. He looked at the judge. "I'll talk," Hollis sobbed. "I'll tell you everything. He has a safe in his garage. He keeps the rest of the money there. Nathaniel looked at the court reporter. Are you getting this? Every word, Your Honor, she said, typing furiously. Good, Nathaniel said. Mr. Miller, get a warrant for that garage, immediately. Nathaniel picked up the gavel. He looked at the courtroom, the stunned families, the vindicated defendants. This court is in recess, he announced. But nobody goes home yet. We're going to fix every single ticket this man wrote in the last month. He banged the gavel. The fallout wasn't a ripple, it was a tsunami. By noon, the story of the judge in the hoodie had leaked to the Associated Press. By 2 p.m., news vans from Baltimore, Philadelphia, and D.C. were swarming the parking lot of the Cecil County Courthouse. They wanted a glimpse of Nathaniel Alexander, the man who had turned a traffic stop into a revolution. But Nathaniel wasn't there. He was sitting in the back of the sheriff's unmarked SUV, flanked by Arthur Halloway and Sheriff Dalton. They were leading a convoy to Sergeant Bronson's residence. You don't have to be here for this, Judge, Sheriff Dalton said, his eyes on the road. We can handle the search. I want to see it, Nathaniel said, looking out the window at the passing cornfields. I want to see the mechanism of his power. A man doesn't become a monster like that overnight, Sheriff. It takes practice. It takes trophies. They pulled up to a split-level ranch house in a quiet cul-de-sac. It was a manicured, perfect suburban home. A tire swing hung from an oak tree. It looked terrifyingly normal. Officer Hollis, now in handcuffs and wearing a wire, sat in the second car. He had given up the combination to the safe. The deputies breached the door. There was no family home. Bronson's wife had reportedly left him 2 years prior, a detail that surprised no one. The house smelled of stale air and bachelor neglect. They moved to the garage. It was organized with military precision, tools on pegboards, a pristine workbench. And there, hidden behind a false panel of drywall that Hollis had described, was the safe. Open it, Dalton ordered. A deputy spun the dial. Right 14, left 32, right 9. The heavy steel door swung open. It was packed, not just with cash, though there were stacks of rubber-banded bills totaling over $50,000, but with things that were far more damning. Nathaniel stepped forward, putting on latex gloves. He reached into the safe and pulled out a shoebox. Inside were driver's licenses. Dozens of them. Trophies, Nathaniel whispered. He flipped through them. A license belonging to a kid from Virginia. One from a woman in New York. One from a doctor in Maryland. Why keep these? Arthur asked, horrified. Power, Nathaniel said. He took their money, probably told them he'd lose the paperwork if they didn't report it. But he kept the licenses to remind himself that he owned them, that he could make them disappear. He dug deeper. He found jewelry, a Rolex watch, a diamond engagement ring, and at the bottom of the box a small, leather-bound notebook. Nathaniel opened it. It was a ledger. Sept 4, Audi A4, $400, speeding, Sept 12, BMW X5, $200, search avoidance. Okitiati 1, Mercedes, Alexander, $850. It went back 6 years. Every stop, every extortion, every stolen dollar meticulously recorded by a man so arrogant he thought he would never be caught. This isn't just theft, Nathaniel said, handing the book to the sheriff. This is a RICO case. This is organized crime. Sheriff Dalton looked at the ledger, his face grim. He was running a toll booth on the Constitution. He was, Nathaniel agreed. And he just gave us the receipts. The discovery of the ledger changed everything. The charges against Bronson were upgraded from larceny to federal racketeering, kidnapping for the false arrests, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The Department of Justice took over the case by Friday. The blue wall didn't just crack, it vaporized. Officers who had worked with Bronson scrambled to cut deals, terrifying that their names were in that little black book. Nathaniel returned to Philadelphia that night. He walked into his brownstone, the silence of his home usually a comfort. Tonight it felt lonely. He sat in his leather armchair and poured a glass of scotch. His hand, usually so steady, had a slight tremor. He looked at the empty spot on the mantel where the photo of his wife usually sat, the photo Hollis had thrown in the mud. He realized he hadn't retrieved it from the impound lot. He put the glass down. He wept. Not for himself, but for the hundreds of people in that ledger who didn't have a law degree, who didn't have Arthur Halloway, and who had lost everything to a man with a badge and a god complex. He dried his eyes. The time for sadness was over. The trial was coming. The trial of United States versus Thomas Bronson did not begin with a bang. It began with a suffocating silence. 6 months had passed since the arrest, but time had only sharpened the public's appetite for the proceedings. The federal courthouse in Baltimore was a fortress. News vans from every major network formed a phalanx around the entrance, their satellite dishes turned upward like hungry mouths waiting to catch the first signal of justice. Inside courtroom 4, the air was cold and recycled, smelling of floor wax and nervous sweat. Nathaniel Alexander sat in the witness box. He was not wearing his robe. He wore a charcoal suit, a white shirt, and a tie the color of dried blood. He looked every inch the titan of the Third Circuit, yet he sat with the patience of a saint. Opposite him, at the defense table, sat Thomas Bronson. The transformation was jarring. The swaggering king of the highway had evaporated. In his place sat a man who looked like he was shrinking inside his own skin. His suit was ill-fitting, likely bought off the rack by his defense attorney, a sharp-featured man named Marcus Kessler, who was known for getting dirty cops off on technicalities. Kessler paced the floor, trying to find a crack in Nathaniel's armor. "Judge Alexander," Kessler began, his voice dripping with faux respect. "Let's go back to that night. You admitted to the officers that you were tired. You had been driving for 3 hours. Is it not possible, even remotely, that you did weave, that you were fatigued?" It was a trap, a classic attempt to introduce reasonable doubt about the initial stop. Nathaniel adjusted his glasses. He looked Kessler in the eye, then shifted his gaze to the jury. "Mr. Kessler, I have presided over 2,000 traffic adjudications in my career. I know the difference between fatigue and impairment. I also know the difference between a lane correction and a weave. But more importantly, I know the difference between a police officer doing his job and a predator scanning for prey." "Objection," Kessler snapped. "Prejudicial language." "Overruled," the presiding judge, Judge Elena Kagan, said softly. "The witness will answer." Nathaniel continued, his voice calm but carrying to the back of the room. "Your client didn't pull me over because I swerved. He pulled me over because he saw a vintage Mercedes in the rain and did a mental calculation of my net worth. He wasn't enforcing the law, he was auditing my wallet." Kessler faltered. He tried to pivot. "But you refused the search. You were uncooperative. You escalated the situation." "I asserted my Fourth Amendment rights," Nathaniel corrected him, his tone turning icy. "If exercising a constitutional right is considered escalation in Cecil County, then the entire department is an organized crime syndicate, not a police force." The jury nodded. The foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, was writing furiously in her notebook. Then came the coup de grace. The prosecution brought out the ledger. When the leather-bound notebook was placed on the evidence table, Bronson flinched. It was a physical reaction, a spasm of pure regret. The prosecutor projected a page onto the courtroom screens. "October 1, Mercedes, Alexander, $850. "Can you explain this entry, Mr. Alexander?" the prosecutor asked. "That is the price of my freedom that night," Nathaniel said. "Or rather, the down payment. Sergeant Bronson stole that money from my wallet while I was handcuffed in the rain. He logged it in his private book like a grocer tracking inventory. He didn't just steal my money, he stole the public trust. That ledger is a receipt for the sale of his soul." Kessler didn't even bother with a closing argument. He knew it was over. The verdict. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. On count 1, racketeering, guilty. On count 2, deprivation of rights under color of law, guilty. On count 3, grand larceny, guilty. On count 4, kidnapping. The guilty verdicts rang out like hammer strikes. 24 counts, a clean sweep. Bronson closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out, getting lost in the stubble of his unshaven cheek. He didn't look at his lawyer. He looked at Nathaniel. For a brief second, his eyes begged for mercy. Nathaniel didn't look away, but his face held no joy. This wasn't a victory. It was a sanitation. The sentencing 2 weeks later, at the sentencing hearing, Nathaniel stood at the victim's podium. The room was packed. "Thomas," Nathaniel said. He didn't use a title. He stripped him of the rank he had abused. "You told me that night to tell it to the judge. I have spent my life in that chair. I know the weight of it. And I know that the greatest sin a person in power can commit is to bully the powerless." Nathaniel gripped the sides of the podium. "You targeted the vulnerable, the young, the out-of-state drivers, the people you thought wouldn't fight back. You thought you were the wolf, and we were the sheep. But you forgot one thing. The law is the shepherd, and the shepherd has returned." He turned to Judge Kagan. "Your Honor, society asks us to hold police to a higher standard. When they fall, they must fall harder than the rest. I ask for the maximum sentence, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Let every officer who wears a badge know that if they turn it into a license to steal, they will trade it for a number." Judge Kagan nodded. She looked at Bronson, who was trembling. "Thomas Bronson, you have disgraced your uniform. You have eroded the foundation of this community. I sentence you to 25 years in a federal correctional institution. You will not be eligible for parole until you are 73 years old." The gavel came down. It sounded like a gunshot. The hard karma. The real twist, however, wasn't the time. It was the destination. Bronson's lawyers had petitioned for him to be sent to a minimum security camp, a club fed, where white-collar criminals played tennis and worked on their memoirs. They argued that as a former police officer, he would be in danger in a regular prison. The Bureau of Prisons denied the request. Because of the kidnapping charge, holding drivers without cause, his security classification was too high for a camp. He was assigned to FCI Cumberland, medium security, general population. The transfer bus ride was a 4-hour descent into hell. Bronson was shackled at the wrists and ankles, chained to a meth dealer from West Virginia, who spent the entire ride staring at Bronson's neck. "You're the cop," the dealer whispered, his breath smelling of decay. "The one from the news." Bronson stared straight ahead, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "We saw you on the TV in the rec room," the dealer chuckled. "My cousin is in Cumberland. He says they're baking a cake for you." When the bus rolled through the double razor-wire gates of Cumberland, the reality set in. The sky seemed to turn grey. The walls were 40 feet high, sheer concrete designed to kill hope. Bronson was processed, strip-searched. The uniform he had worn with such arrogance was replaced by a khaki jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. His name was gone. He was now inmate, Dartbutchess 809-460-0031. He was marched into Unit B. The noise hit him first, a cacophony of shouting, metal clanging on metal, and the low, thrumming bass of 100 conversations. As the guard, a young officer who looked barely 20, walked Bronson across the floor, the noise stopped. It rippled outward from the door. Silence spread across the unit like a wave. Inmates playing cards stopped. Men lifting weights froze mid-rep. Hundreds of eyes locked onto the former sergeant. They knew. In prison, a dirty cop is lower than a snitch. A dirty cop who stole money. He was a walking target. Bronson kept his head down, clutching his thin mattress roll to his chest like a shield. "Hey, Sergeant!" The voice came from the upper tier. Bronson looked up instinctively. Leaning over the railing was a young black man. He was muscular, with tattoos climbing up his neck. He looked familiar. It was Henderson, the kid Bronson had shoved into the mud on the dashcam video, the kid whose probation violation had landed him here 3 months ago. Henderson didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He just smiled. It was a wide, terrifyingly welcoming smile. He tapped his wrist, mimicking a watch. "Time. You have so much time." Bronson looked away, his stomach churning with bile. He reached his cell. Cell 204. It was small, claustrophobic. He stepped inside, and the bars slid shut behind him. Clang. He sat on the bunk. He was the law no more. He was just another body in the cage he had helped build. He buried his face in his hands, and for the first time in 20 years, Thomas Bronson prayed. But the concrete walls absorbed the sound, and no answer came. The aftermath. 3 months later, Nathaniel Alexander was back in Philadelphia. The media circus had moved on. The interviews were done. He was in his chambers, putting on his robe. He looked in the mirror. He looked older, tired, but lighter. The weight of the anger was gone. He walked into his courtroom. It was a standard docket. Drug possession. Petty theft. The bailiff called the first case. State v. Michael Davies. A young kid, barely 18, shuffled to the defense table. He looked terrified. He had been caught with a gram of marijuana and a scale, a distribution charge, a felony that would ruin his life before it started. Nathaniel looked at the police report. The arresting officer had written, "Suspect was cooperative, no history of violence." Nathaniel looked at the kid. He saw the fear. He remembered the feeling of the handcuffs, the cold rain, the helplessness. "Mr. Davies," Nathaniel said gently. The kid looked up, trembling. "You made a mistake," Nathaniel said. "But a mistake shouldn't define your entire existence. Do you want to go to college?" "Yes. Yes, sir. I'm trying to get into community college." Nathaniel closed the file. He looked at the prosecutor. "Counsel, I am reducing this to a misdemeanor possession. Time served." "And Mr. Davies?" "Yes, Your Honor. You are sentenced to 50 hours of community service. You will complete it by tutoring students at the local high school. Do you understand?" The kid's jaw dropped. He looked like he had been given a winning lottery ticket. "Thank you." "Thank you, Judge." Nathaniel banged the gavel. "Dismissed." As the kid walked out, beaming, Nathaniel sat back. He touched the smooth wood of the bench. Justice wasn't about the hammer. It wasn't about the cage. It was about knowing the difference between a criminal and a human being. Nathaniel Alexander had learned that lesson in the rain, on the side of I-95, and as long as he held the gavel, no one in his courtroom would ever forget it. They say justice is blind, but as we just saw, sometimes she takes off the blindfold and stares you right in the face. Thomas Bronson thought he was untouchable because he had a badge. He forgot that a badge is borrowed power. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people. Nathaniel Alexander didn't just win a court case. He dismantled a tyranny. He proved that no matter how dark the road is, or how heavy the rain falls, the truth has a way of rising with the sun. Bronson is currently serving year 2 of his 25-year sentence, and every morning when he wakes up in that cell, he remembers the one mistake that cost him everything. He pulled over the wrong man. If this story fired you up, if you believe that nobody is above the law, smash that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that karma is real, and it is watching. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, because next week we're covering a landlord who illegally evicted a tenant, only to find out the tenant owned the building. You do not want to miss it. Stay safe, stay legal, and I'll see you in the next one.